Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's continue. So hopefully today we're going to finish the discussion of aggregate demand and begin just with a few introductory remarks on the aggregate supply. If I'm not mistaken, the last thing that we discussed on Monday was the different reasons or different causes that may shift the aggregate demand curve. The initial aggregate demand curve that corresponds to the relationship between the price level and the real GDP. And we first analyzed what can cause a movement along the given aggregate demand curve. In other words, what are the reasons for the changes in quantity of goods and services, real GDP? The reasons for the changes in the quantity demanded as a function of the price level variations, the price level changes, how the quantity demanded reacts. And then we'll see the second order changes that may happen is actually that when we keep the price level fixed or constant, the demand still can increase for other reasons. The quantity that people want to buy in total, the economy as a whole, may increase because other things may be happening in the economy that causes the demand to shift. Right? This is shown in graphical sense as a movement of a given demand curve, right? If it's an increase in demand, to the left, it's an increase in demand. Here. And the key piece of analytical interpretation here was that there are 4 different reasons why this might happen. Why a change in the aggregate demand happens. So you see that the aggregate demand would be understood as a total level of spending in the economy. And then we can write it down, we can write down the same equation that we used to calculate GDP by expenditure, which means consumer spending plus investment spending plus government spending plus net exports. So then a change in any one of these individual components of total spending may increase aggregate. And we've seen that all of them are proportionately related to aggregate demand, which means if any one of those individual components increases, the aggregate demand itself will increase. So they move in the same direction. We've seen one more thing actually that the next question that we asked was which factors contribute to the changes in those individual components. The consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. And I think that the last thing that we said was we reviewed the factors that can contribute to the changes in consumption. See that one of the reasons why consumption may change is that when the wealth increases. Wealth is a sum total of monetary and non-monetary assets. If wealth increases even without income changing at all, consumption may increase. Consumption will increase. So two people with the exact same income, one of them sells a house, her wealth increases. it's very likely that this person will be spending more than the other one who has the same exact income but has an increased wealth. So variations in wealth are proportionally related to the variations in consumption. Any unexpected or expected increase in wealth may shift consumption. Interest rate is another shifter. Consumer spending shifter, interest rate. So you see what happens when interest rate goes up or down, the demand for loans changes. Here is the interest rate, is the price of money, down here is the quantity of loanable bonds. So the demand curve for loans is downward slope, which means that higher the interest rate, lower the demand for loans. For all loans, business loans and consumer loans. So this demand curve covers both, contains both. So if the interest rate goes down, this is the interest rate number 2, then the quantity demanded will increase. So when the demand for consumer loans increases, that means that the consumer spending increases. More money being borrowed for consumer purposes means more purchases of consumer goods. So then the variation in interest rate can affect consumption in the exact same way. Not in the exact same way, analogous way. So an interest rate goes up, consumption will go down because consumer loans, the quantity of consumer loans will go down. Demand for consumer loans will go down. And vice versa. If interest rate goes down, the demand for consumer loans will go up, and conversely, the consumption will go up. So they move in the opposite direction. Interest rates and consumption are inversely related. One more thing is expectations. Expectations, I think that we covered this already. Expectations about future prices and expectations about incomes. So if you expect the future price to be higher than current price, your current spending is going to increase. Consumption will increase. Why? Because you know that the purchasing power of your dollar tomorrow will be lower than today. You buy less for the same amount of money. So inflationary expectations increase current spending. Contrary-wise, the deflationary expectations that the price level is going to decrease in the future, will reduce consumption right now. So if you expect prices to go down, you will save money for later when you buy more for the same amount. So then consumption will go down. Present consumption will go down. So pay attention, it's always varying between present consumption and expectation about future prices. Income taxes, of course, higher income taxes. Incomes, what happens if you expect your income to be higher in the future? You can increase your spending right now. And if you expect your income in the future to go down, you will decrease your consumption. It's simple, straightforward. Why do you do that? Technically, you can in the present cover your costs with the income that you have, but anticipating anticipating lower cash flow in the future, you start tightening well preemptively present. Vice versa, if you anticipate your income to increase, then you start spending a little bit more. For example, by borrowing more money right now, because you know that your income will be higher, so you will be able more easily servicing the higher amount of debt in the future. And finally, income taxes. How do they affect the aggregate demand? Obviously, income tax. If it decreases, consumption will go down. Because your disposable income will be lower. Pay to the same gross income, if the government increases your income taxes, there will be less money left for you, so then consumption will be negatively affected. So that's one reason you increased income taxes may reduce GDP or aggregate demand. Now let's talk about investment. A somewhat similar situation. Investment component, GDP, so this is the second one. So the first reason is again interest rate. Interest rate variation. The same logic graph here. Demand for loans. And the same dynamic. You go from interest rate 1 and quantity demanded 1 to interest rate 2. As the quantity demanded increases, interest rate goes down, quantity demanded increases. So then the interest rate is again proportionately related to the level of investment. If it increases, investment increases as well, and vice versa, decreases. Expectations about future sales, about future prices of your goods. Expectations about future sales. So can somebody speculate? How does this work? How do the expectations about the future sales affect your decisions to invest right now? Let's say that you expect the price to go down. You expect your revenue to go down. How are you going to react on the investment front? Are you going to invest more or less? The same? Less. Yeah, less. Okay, so proportionate relationship. So investment and the expectations about future sales go up, get more optimistic, you're going to invest more, hire more people, buy new machinery, equipment, expand the size of the operation, so and vice versa. Finally, business taxes. This is easy. It's completely analogous to income taxes. So if business taxes go up, investment will go down. That's the opposite, moving the opposite direction. One of the big problems of the American economy until 2017 was the corporate income tax was second highest in the developed world, Western world. American businesses were very uncompetitive to that because you pay 37% corporate income tax. So why until 2017? That is the problem, because it's been reduced in 2017 significantly. So then if you reduce business taxes, then people will, shareholders will have more money after taxation, so they will be ready to invest more. So business taxes adversely affect the investment component the total spending. You can say in a certain sense that they adversely affect also consumption spending, because if you tax dividends, if you tax corporate income, more the shareholders will have less money, so they may decrease their consumer spending. So, okay, so this is an overview of the first two components. What can lead to a change in the aggregate demand? Which individual factors can contribute towards a change in the aggregate demand? Government spending. This is one big topic that we're going to see today. So what can lead the government to increase or decrease the aggregate demand? That's the main, maybe one of the 2 or 3 main problems that we're going to be talking about all the time. Believe me, you're going to get, you will have more than enough of that later on. Just bear in mind, for now, that we're going to skip this, that we're going to discuss this much more later on. And this is one of the main problems of macroeconomic policy, which factors determine the level of government spending. And finally, today we're going to say something about the fourth factor, which is the net exports. What is that? The definition of that. What is net exports? It's export minus import. So then your aggregate demand increases when this number is increasing, and it's decreasing when net exports is decreasing. So everything that encourages exports and discourages imports is a factor that contributes towards an increase in aggregate demand. And there are 2 main factors here when it comes to Annex. The first one is the real GDP of foreign countries, real income of the foreigners. And the second one is the exchange rate between domestic currency and foreign currency. So how does the first one affect aggregate demand? It's very simple. You have, remember, this is not nominal GDP like in dollar terms or in euro terms. It's a real purchasing power adjustment, which means that people can buy more goods and services for the money that they acquire. What happens when a society's income increases? People can afford to buy more stuff. People can afford to buy more stuff domestically produced, as well as to buy more of the imported goods. So let's say the Europeans get a European GDP, real GDP per capita increases 5%. That means that Europeans now have 5% more money, or they can buy 5% more goods and services. Some of those goods will be bought from domestic producers in Europe. Some of them will be imported from America. To the extent that they increase their spending on American goods, American export will increase. Which means that all other things being equal, American net exports will increase. If our imports remains where it was, our exports goes up, our total spending increases. So you see how real GDP changes in real income of foreign countries can increase our demand for our goods and services. That's a simplest fashion to translate this fancy talk into common sense notions is actually that it's good to have a wealthy customers. It's better for us than Europeans who are wealthy because they're going to be buying more of our stuff. That's simple. That's what this means. That's pretty simple. It's slightly more complicated with the exchange rate. Now we want to look at what happens to the demand for our goods and services with the exchange rate of our currency vis-a-vis some other currency changes. So let's say United States has the dollar and the European Union has the euro. And let's say that the exchange rate, this is not a real exchange rate, but I'm going to just impose it here. But for $1, you can get 2 euros. That's the exchange rate. And now let's assume for a moment that the exchange rate changes. This is the initial one. And now for $1, for whatever reason, you have to pay 3 euros. And Europeans go crazy and start printing money like maniacs. And now the value of dollar versus euro, what did it happen? What changed? The value of dollar vis-a-vis euro in the meantime.
The dollar is more valuable.
Yeah, dollar is more. This is called, you know, the technical term for this in monetary economics, probably appreciated. This is the currency appreciation. It's an increase in the rate, exchange rate of domestic currency versus exchange rate appreciation. That's when the domestic currency gains value vis-a-vis foreign currency. So now let's analyze what's going to happen to domestic export and import as a consequence of currency appreciation. So let's talk first about the export. So what is the export? Europeans come to America and buying American stuff and shipping it back home. So now, instead of having to pay 2 euros for $1 American, they have to pay 3 euros for 1 American. How will that affect demand for foreign demand, European demand for American goods and services? It will go down. Because now, in order to get $1 to buy something for $1 in America, you have to sacrifice 3 euros instead of 2 euros of your income, which is euro denominated. You earn your money in Europe in euros. And in order to buy anything in America from American producers, you have to convert your currency into American dollars. And if you have to pay now 3 euros instead of 2 euros for the same amount of money, it will be less attractive for you to do the whole transaction. So then the spending on American produced goods by foreigners will decline. So the first counter effect is that export goes down. What happens to import? Now look from the opposite.
It's going to go up.
So why?
Because it's cheaper.
It's cheaper. You go to Europe. You are the importer from Europe to America. You have dollar income. Before, you have to pay how many? 50 cents or 1 euro to get a chance to buy something from a French or an Italian firm. Now, what is it now? It's 33 cents. So lesser percentage of your dollar income is necessary to buy a euro and to purchase euro-denominated products. Then it becomes much more attractive for American importers, for people who want to buy stuff to buy from foreigners vis-a-vis domestic. So import increases. So then we can say that the appreciation of domestic currency vis-a-vis foreign currency will reduce aggregate demand by both decreasing export and increasing imports. So domestic goods become relatively more expensive vis-a-vis foreign goods, and both domestic people and foreigners buy more foreign goods and less domestic goods. The opposite happens if you have, for example, that the exchange rate now changes, imagine $1 to 1 euro, which is close to what is the case right now. This is called depreciation. Depreciation of currency. So now what the foreigners do now, instead of having to pay 2 euros for $1 to buy an American good in the United States, you now pay just €1 your European income. So it's much better for you if you want to import stuff from America to European Union. It's much cheaper. So then American exports will increase because it will be cheaper for foreigners to buy here, relatively cheaper to buy here than before. And what happens to domestic importation? Instead of 50 cents in the first case and 33 cents in the second case, now how much money you need to pay to get €1? $1. So importation becomes in as much less attractive or expensive. So then the importation goes down. So then the conclusion is that the currency depreciation leads to an increase in aggregate demand. And that's the secret why many, especially bad governments, believe that you can increase your economic prosperity by debasing currency, by bringing down the exchange rate. That's one of the reasons why America is accusing China of manipulating, currency manipulation. This is the secret. That's why they're worried about that. Because you're debasing your currency, you're making your export goods artificially cheap, and you're making importation into your country artificially more expensive. And thereby, you're hurting your trading partners. Actually, the currency depreciation is very often lauded as a policy tool to reduce the trade deficit. If you have a trade deficit with the foreign country, that means that you're importing more goods in dollar value, in real terms, more than you are exporting. So whatever can increase your exportation and decrease the importation, will reduce your trade deficit, and currency depreciation is one of those policy tools that used to be used much more often before. Now it's, for a variety of reasons that we will discuss later on, is not so popular anymore, at least in the Western world. Any questions, Vaswar? Okay, the next thing here is, what about the money supply? How can money supply affect aggregate demand? So I will erase this. So money supply is changes in money supply, delta M. M is a capital letter M is a designation or a symbol for money supply, or quantity of money in demand. As you will see later on, it's not quite clear what the supply of money is. There are different measures of money supply, more narrow measures that include only cash and points, and more broader measures of money supply that include all kinds of things, including credit and time deposits and so on and so on. But at any rate, if we, for a moment, assume that we know what is money and what is money supply, changes in money supply, the question that we ask now, how they can affect aggregate demand. And this is not quite settled science, shall I say, but it seems that the consensus is that yes, they can. Changes in money supply can affect that. And the main sequence, the main causal chain to which is this effectuated is through the interest rate, through the financial markets, through the credit market. So it has to do with how new money changes in the money supply. That means increasing money supply or decreasing money supply. What the real effects of a change in money supply will be, it depends crucially on how money enters the economic system. In a modern economy, 99% of the time, new money enters the economic system through the credit market, through the banking and financial system. And how it works is simply by a central bank creating new money that didn't exist before out of thin air. That's called, as you will see later on, the open market operations. That's a fancy term for government buying bonds, for the central bank buying government bonds from private institutions, typically banks, and creating new money, just simply printing new money to pay for that. That's simple. I'm a central bank, you are a bunch of bankers, you hold maybe $30 billion worth of government bonds. And I say tomorrow, I'm going to buy 10 billion. How I'm going to pay? I'm going to just print money. I'm going to just credit your debit accounts with $10 billion. of newly invented money. How does that affect aggregate demand, you may ask? Can you speculate for a moment? Why would that affect the total amount of spending? That I created $10 billion worth of money for a bunch of bankers, Wall Street. Sorry, but I have to draw all those graphs all the time. So interest rate is here, quantity demand is here. There is a demand for loans, let's say for business loans here. And there is a supply. Supply is determined by interest rate. Higher the interest rate, more money people will save. And there is equilibrium for a loan of a certain maturity, let's say 1 year loan. This would be the equilibrium interest rate that equalizes the supply and demand. And this will be the quantity, equilibrium quantity of money. Let's say loanable funds, funds that are available for credit transactions from lenders to borrowers. Now, what happens when a central bank does this magic that I mentioned, create $10 billion that didn't exist before, just shifts the supply curve. It creates $10 billion worth, potentially much more, of credit that didn't exist before. You have now in your vaults $10 billion that didn't exist before. Your cash, your bank reserves increase. Now you can create more credit for your customers that you couldn't have created before. So that's the mechanism. So the supply curve shifts to the right, which means that the new money is available to banks. How does that affect the equilibrium? It's the demand curve and the new supply curve intersect here. You see that the interest rate is lower. Interest rate goes down. And the quantity, equilibrium quantity of credit that will be created goes up. So if we assume that the quantity of business loans and consumer loans increases, then we can say that the change in money supply will increase investment and consumption components of total spending through the instrumentality of credit market, financial markets, the banking system. The central bank helps private banks create more credit. You will see this is one of the key problems with macroeconomics, because notice what happened here. This shift in the supply curve can happen in two ways. It can happen if people decide to spend less and save more. So you know that income equals consumption plus saving. If I have $1,000, I save $300 and I spend $700. So the supply of savings, the supply of credit in an economy can happen if people decide freely to spend less and to save more. They will put more money in a bank, and the banks will be able to create more credit because they have higher cash reserves. So we can say in economic theory that the time preference changes, that people are ready to sacrifice more, to spend less now in order to invest more in the future. But now with this central bank operation, you have this weird thing that mimics the effects of higher savings rate. Actually, no new savings materialize. People still want to spend and save in the same proportion as before, but the government makes it look like new savings was available. And this creates a lot of problems for the business cycle, for the stability of the financial markets and so on. This fake signal that the money printing sends to entrepreneurs creates all kinds of havoc and trouble. But for now, we can say at least for a while, you can make it look as if things are improving by creating artificial credit through money printing, rather than from real savings that people want to make. So the answer is yes, the aggregate demand, especially in the short run, can be increased by changing the money supply. The next question is, can you increase one of the components of total spending of aggregate demand without reducing any other component? The answer is you can do it in two ways. So ordinarily, if you assume that quantity of money is fixed, no magic with creating $10 billion of credit overnight, then the only way for a society to increase consumption would be to reduce investment. So investment equals savings. In order to invest in future production, you have to save some money to withhold it from present consumption. Okay. And the only way for you to increase present consumption is to reduce your investment, or vice versa. If you want to invest and produce more, you will have to save more money, which means you will have to spend a little bit less right now. So that's if the money supply is fixed. So then the only way that you can simultaneously increase your consumption and your investment is that you increase the money supply. As in this case here. Or, alternative, one more thing can happen. The velocity of circulation of the existing money may increase. So total spending, I can say that aggregate demand equals the quantity of money times velocity of circulation. So what is velocity of circulation? That's the frequency with which people make payments. So if I have $100, that's the supply of money. Let's say that we have $100 in this one. If I pay to you $100 for something, you pay to him $100 for something, you pay to her. That's 4 times, or 1, 2, 3 times. Transactions over 1 day. So that's 100 times 3, that's $300 of total spending in our economy. But then if the next day, actually, we have the same money supply, $100, and we make 6 transactions. So the total spending will be 2 times higher, $600 instead of. So then you can increase total spending even without increasing the money supply if the velocity of circulation increases, if the frequency with which people make payments increase. Okay, so bear in mind that what counts here is that total spending might be increased by money supply increasing, which is often the case, most often the case, or if the velocity of circulation increases, or both. So now, intuitively, what can influence the velocity of circulation? When the velocity of circulation is most likely to be high, and when it is likely that the velocity will be lower. Consumer confidence. What kind of economy you'd expect to see when you say the velocity of circulation is very high?
Good economy.
Yeah, good economy, optimism. So people don't hesitate to spend whatever money they have. And in a recession, typically the velocity of circulation dramatically declines. Because people are careful, people don't want to spend money. Because the price level typically tends to go down in the recession, so people wait to, or even further drop in prices. And also uncertainty, what's going to happen, people withhold money and wait and save more and spend less. Okay. Any questions? Okay, I'm going to assume that this is clear for now. If it is clear and you have still time to reconsider and ask some questions, I will shift in a minute or two to aggregate supply, basic definitions of aggregate supply. We're not going to finish today, but we're going to start discussing it. Okay, aggregate supply is a function that relates or correlates price level to, again, real GDP. But the real GDP that will be produced by producers. So now we are looking at the macroeconomy from the supply side, from the producer side of the firms. How will they react to changes in interest rates, to changes in price level, how those changes will affect, and some other potential factors, how those changes will affect their decisions, how much to produce, whether to increase or to decrease production, and so on. And one of the complications of the aggregate supply analysis is actually that we have to sharply distinguish, we will see why, between the short run and long run aggregates. They're very different. So the short run aggregate supply curve that we will discuss today, we will begin discussing today, is different from the long run aggregate supply curve that we will discuss on Friday by the fact that it is upward sloping. There is a positive correlation between the price level and real GDP. And there are two reasons, just you see the analogy with the aggregate demand analysis. There are two reasons why the curve is sloping upwards. Typically, we assume that the supply curves should be, most supply curves in any kind of economic analysis should be sloping upwards. In this particular case, there are usually two main theoretical reasons why we believe this. The first one is something called sticky wages. And the second one is, let's say, worker misperceptions. Let's find out. Let's see the misperceptions of what exactly. So let's start with the sticky wages. Wages are prices of labor. They're usually determined by long-term contracts. Changes in demand for goods and services are short-term. That happens sometimes from hour to hour, from day to day, from week to week. Changes in the wage rates are long-term. That means that you make a contract for 1 year, it ain't gonna be revised in 1 year. There are reasons, good theoretical reasons for this, having to do with the individual preferences of employers and employees, and also some of them having to do with the particularities of labor market regulations, why the wage contracts are long-term. So that means typically that on the one hand, employers have the interest of having predictable labor costs over a certain period of time. So for you, it might be more important to have a stable, easily calculable labor cost for a protracted period of time than to save money by adjusting wages up or down depending on daily productivity. It may be more costly for you to discover a true price of labor from day to day than to pay a fixed price that might risk actually paying a little bit more for labor. So for you, it's a good thing. It's a positive economic good. Is this stability of or relatively easy calculable labor costs. So employers are interested, they benefit very often from long-term wage contracts. Employees also benefit from stable wage contracts because they can then predict or they can plan their expenditure and saving and investment and consumption because their income is relatively stable. So both parties to the exchange benefit from relative inflexibility of wages. See, because they're determined on a long-term basis, they cannot adjust from day to day as a reaction to the changes in the demand for the final good that the labor is producing. And there are other reasons for this stickiness. They stick, they are not easy to change. For relative stickiness of labor contracts, that's the trade union contracts that make it difficult to cut wages. So like you and me as an employer and employee, we may actually decide to change wages. We are flexible actually if we consider it more profitable or more beneficial to us to make wage contracts in 3 months or 6 months. It's much more easy. It's much easier for us individually to do that than the trade unions that are notorious for their demands for not cutting wages no matter what. So that's the stickiness of wages, or actually the fact that wages do not react promptly to the changing conditions of demand on the market. What does that have to do with the upward sloping shape of the supply curve? It has to do with the following fact, that as the price level increases, or if it decreases, you cannot so easily react to the changes in demand by cutting wages. You have to react by adjusting the level of output, adjusting the level of production. Essentially, since you cannot reduce the wages in the short run, that's the key point. In the short run, an increased price level will lead to an increase in GDP. But we will see why this doesn't work in the long run. But I hope sticky wages and work in these percentages here almost all the time do not work in the long time. We're going to stop here. We're going to finish this next time on Friday, and we're going to talk also about the vertical long run supply curve. We're going to skip. I will greatly abbreviate discussion of the equilibrium, because that's the thing that we're going to be talking about much more later on. Once you have the supply and demand, what happens if they change? If both supply and demand change at the same time, it gets very complicated to make sense of what's going on. So we're going to greatly abbreviate that discussion as a part of this chapter.